Disarmament, Part 1. Criminals by Western Values. Considering anything good which helps communism, the Soviets use promise-breaking as an instrument of policy. They engage us in agreements for the purpose of breaking them. We are bound by the agreements which bind the Soviets, not at all. Trying to prove that we sincerely want peace, our leaders make dangerous proposals in disarmament negotiations with the Soviets when it is wrong for us even to discuss disarmament with such criminals. This sickly attitude of guilt about our own accomplishments, plus Soviet espionage and the propaganda help which they have received from brainwashed American liberals, have enabled them to catch up with us in nuclear development. Now, out of fear or something, our leaders are planning total surrender of the United States in the interest of peace. That is a summary of my report on Disarmament, Part 1. The full report after a message from my sponsor. Even in these days, when the American public is prepared to expect almost anything from officialdom, it would be shocking to hear that law enforcement officials of our major cities were negotiating peace and disarmament agreements with criminal leaders. But that should be less shocking than news stories about hopeful efforts of Western leaders to negotiate a peace and disarmament pact with international criminals who control the communist slave empire. Communists and their friends do not, of course, regard themselves as criminals. But by the standard, communists are criminals. Communists consider anything good which promotes the cause of socialism, that is, communism, war, mass murder, the extermination of whole races through enforced starvation, torture of human beings, rape, pillage, communism. On the other hand, anything is bad which hurts communism. Love of God and country, kindness, charity, honesty, thrift, hard work, all are bad if they in any way interfere with the communist drive for world conquest. Weapons in the hands of communists are considered benign tools for achieving world peace. Weapons in the hands of non-communists are considered horrible instruments for oppression and conquest. Communists have been advocating total disarmament in a peaceful world since 1916. Their program is simple and openly stated by communist leaders: to disarm all non-communists so that they can be destroyed. The objective of every disarmament discussion is to disarm non-communist nations, specifically the United States, while increasing the armaments of the Soviet Union. These facts being known, it is ludicrous and dangerous for our political leaders even to discuss disarmament with Soviet leaders. These facts have been known and widely publicized by communists themselves since 1916. The performance of communists is in tune with their morality. In 1955, when President Eisenhower was planning a summit meeting, the Senate Internal Security Subcommittee, trying to show Eisenhower that any meeting or negotiation with communists is wrong and dangerous, released a study of the Soviet treaty records since 1917. The subcommittee proved that treaty breaking is an instrument of Soviet policy. When the Soviets engage United States leaders in negotiation for some agreement, they make proposals which could not, in sanity, be accepted. Their propaganda machines in the United Nations, in Moscow, and in Soviet embassies throughout the world, aided and abetted by pro-communist and communist-following liberal forces in the United States, attempt to conceal the fact that the Soviets have made unreasonable demands. The propaganda berates the United States for being unyielding, accusing us of acting in bad faith because we will not truly engage in the give and take necessary in such negotiations. Most thoughtful people do see through the Soviet propaganda and say so. But the Soviets, caring not a fig for world opinion, keep hammering away. Large numbers of fools, fatheads, pacifists, and brainwashed liberals are deceived. They join the communist chorus, criticizing the United States for refusing to negotiate in good faith. American leaders, sensitive to the point of nausea to world opinion, begin to wince and apologize and to make concessions. After milking all possible propaganda benefit out of the situation, the Soviets may decide to enter into an agreement. If so, they generally capture whatever is to be gained from the approval of world opinion by making some meaningless concession, which our own officials helped to puff up as something important in order to convince American voters that our leaders have driven a hard bargain with communists. Once the U.S.-USSR agreement is made, either through formal treaty process or by the informal means of verbal acknowledgement, as in the case of the ban on nuclear testing, which began in October 1958, we are, of course, bound by the terms of the agreement. The Soviets do not consider themselves bound at all. As a matter of policy, they violate the terms of the agreement they have made, sometimes openly to show arrogant contempt for us, as in their immediate and continuous violations of the Korean Armistice Agreement made in July 1953, sometimes surreptitiously, as in their violations of the Nuclear Test Ban Agreement of October 1958. Even if we should eventually repudiate the agreement because of Soviet violations, we have been, during the period of our compliance, hobbled by it, while the Soviets feel free to do whatever the agreement was intended to keep them from doing. The Soviet technique of negotiating and propagandizing United States leaders into surrendering vital interests of our country have been particularly harmful in the area of disarmament. Indeed, the record proves that unless the American people can somehow manage, through their Congress, to reverse present settled trends, we are headed toward total surrender of the United States to a communist-controlled world superstate system. In June 1946, Bernard Baruch, America's representative in the United Nations Atomic Energy Commission, submitted the Baruch Plan to give an international authority control of all atomic energy activities. The Soviets approved the Baruch Plan, which would have stripped the United States of atomic weapons, because the Soviets were years behind us and knew that the UN authority could not limit their own plans for research and development. But the Soviets wanted the Baruch Plan implemented through the UN Security Council, where the Soviets had a veto. The Baruch Plan foundered on this point. It was never adopted. As time passed, the Soviets became less interested because they had begun to catch up with us in atomic research and development, thanks to our voluntary curtailment, to the atom spies who delivered our major secrets to the Soviets, and to German scientists whom we had permitted the Soviets to kidnap and take to Russia. The disarmament propaganda, therefore, subtly changed. Less emphasis on international control of atomic energy, more on have nations sharing their atomic energy knowledge and materials with have-not nations. Dialectics, this meant giving United States materials away abroad so that the United States could not use them for military purposes, while the Soviets could concentrate on military use for their nuclear materials. In December 1953, President Eisenhower gave a great boost to this diversion of nuclear materials propaganda. In an Atoms for Peace speech to the United Nations General Assembly, President Eisenhower recommended that the UN create an international atomic energy agency to which all governments producing atomic energy could make contributions of normal uranium and fissionable materials. The UN agency would store the materials and allocate them around the world to nations not producing such materials for peaceful uses. Almost 3 years later, on October 23, 1956, the General Assembly of the UN approved a charter for the Atomic Energy Agency which Eisenhower wanted. 3 days later, October 26, 1956, before any nation had had opportunity to ratify the charter, President Eisenhower pledged the United States to give this new UN agency immediately 11,000 pounds of uranium-235, and after that, to match combined contributions of all nations on Earth. At the time, the estimated production cost of 11,000 pounds of uranium-235 was $110 million. Without consulting Congress, indeed before the International Atomic Energy Agency Charter had even been submitted to the Senate for approval, President Eisenhower promised to start the International Atom Bank off with a gift of $110 million worth of uranium-235 and promised that United States gifts would stay at least that far ahead of the gifts of all other nations on Earth put together. The late Senator Joseph McCarthy fought hard against Senate ratification of the Atomic Agency Charter, predicting that communists would take the thing over and use it against us. The Senate Atomic Energy Committee held hearings, receiving abundant and repeated assurances from the State Department and from the Atomic Energy Commission that there was no possibility of communists taking over the new agency. The parade of witnesses from the executive branch of government virtually guaranteed that the International Atomic Energy Agency would always be run the way the United States wanted. Internationalist supporters of the plan were scornful of McCarthyites for suggesting that the President and the State Department and that the Atomic Energy Commission would do anything or recommend anything dangerous for America. The Senate ratified the charter of the new agency in June 1957. The agency came into existence in July 1957, and by the end of October 1957, the communists had taken control of it. Next week, more details. Goodbye. God bless you. For a printed copy of this broadcast, send 25 cents to Dan Smoot, Dallas 14, Texas, and ask for 403, Disarmament Part 1. 6 copies, $1.